It was a quiet afternoon at Little Steps Daycare, where kids' laughter filled the air and the scent of crayons and baby wipes lingered. Parents came and went, picking up their little ones, exchanging smiles with the caregivers. But when Emily, a longtime daycare worker, saw Mr. Johnson walk through the door, something didn't sit right with her. She had met Olivia's father before, a polite, well-dressed man who always arrived on time, greeted everyone warmly, and scooped his daughter into his arms with the kind of love that made people smile. But today felt different. The way he moved, the stiffness in his posture, the way he avoided eye contact, it sent a quiet alarm ringing in Emily's mind. She brushed it off at first. Maybe it was just a long day. Maybe she was overthinking. But as she handed little Olivia to him, she couldn't shake the feeling gnawing at her gut. Something wasn't right. As he turned to leave, Olivia didn't reach for him the way she usually did. Instead, she hesitated. A tiny hesitation, the kind only a caregiver who truly paid attention would notice. It was enough to make Emily's stomach twist. Then, just as they reached the door, Olivia did something that sent a chill down Emily's spine. She whispered, almost too softly to hear, "Miss Emily, help." Emily's heart pounded. Had she imagined it? Was Olivia just being fussy? Or was there something more? And then, in a completely different part of town, another story was unfolding, one that would change a young man's life forever. On a crowded city bus, 17-year-old Marcus sat in his usual spot near the window, headphones in, lost in thought. It was just another routine evening after school, nothing special, until he noticed her. A woman, visibly pregnant, standing near the front of the bus, shifting uncomfortably as the vehicle jostled over potholes. Marcus didn't think twice. He pulled out his earbuds, stood up, and motioned for her to take his seat. "Here, ma'am, you can sit." She looked at him, startled, as if she wasn't used to such kindness. "Oh, thank you." As she sat down, she gave him a long, thoughtful look, as if she wanted to say something more. But instead of speaking, she reached into her purse, pulled out a small folded note, and handed it to him with a simple, "This is for you." Confused, Marcus took the note and slipped it into his pocket, not realizing that the few words written inside would turn his entire world upside down. And just like that, in two different places, two seemingly ordinary moments would lead to something far greater, one uncovering a terrifying truth, the other unlocking an unexpected future. What did the note say? And what had Emily just witnessed? Stay with us, because what happens next will leave you speechless. Her feet moved before she even had time to think. Meanwhile, across town, Marcus sat on the bus, the folded note still in his pocket. The words of the woman who had given it to him played over in his head. "This is for you." The way she said it, with an almost knowing expression, sent a strange feeling through him. He wasn't used to people noticing him. He was Emily's breath caught in her throat as she watched Olivia and her father step outside. The little girl's voice echoed in her mind. So soft, yet so clear. "Miss Emily, help." She had known Olivia since she was barely able to walk. The little girl was bright, full of laughter, and always excited to see her dad. But today, something was off. That hesitation, that whisper, it wasn't normal. Her fingers tightened around the clipboard she had been holding. Maybe she was overreacting. Parents had bad days. Kids got fussy. But something deep inside her screamed that this wasn't just a bad day. Emily moved toward the door, pretending to straighten a stack of papers at the front desk, just so she could get a better look. Through the large glass window, she saw Mr. Johnson walking across the parking lot with Olivia in his arms. His grip looked tense, different from the usual easy way he carried her. Olivia wasn't giggling like she normally did. Instead, she was stiff, her tiny hands clutching the fabric of his coat. Emily's heart pounded. A car door opened. He placed Olivia inside. Then, right before he closed the door, Olivia looked up. Her eyes locked with Emily's through the window. Wide. Pleading. Emily's pulse hammered in her ears. She had a choice. Stay inside and convince herself she was imagining things. Or step outside and do something. UST another kid trying to get through life, juggling school, work, and everything else. He pulled out the note and unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was neat but rushed, as if written quickly. Meet me at the coffee shop on 8th Street. Tomorrow, 5 p.m. It's important. Marcus frowned. What was this? A joke? A mistake? Did she mean to give it to someone else? He glanced up, searching the bus, but the woman was gone. The seat she had taken was empty, like she had vanished into thin air. His fingers tightened around the paper. What could be so important? Back at the daycare, Emily stepped into the cold evening air, her breath visible in the crisp air. She forced a casual smile as she approached Mr. Johnson's car, her heart pounding in her chest. "Hey, Mr. Johnson," she said, keeping her tone light. "I think Olivia left her jacket inside. Want me to grab it for you?" Mr. Johnson stiffened, his hand pausing on the door handle. He turned, flashing her a tight smile. "Oh, that's okay. We've got another one at home." Emily's stomach twisted. His voice was normal, polite even, but there was something unnatural about the way he was rushing. She glanced at Olivia, who was buckled in her seat. The little girl wasn't looking at her father. She was looking at her. Emily forced herself to stay calm. "It's no trouble. It's getting cold, and I know how much she loves that pink jacket with the unicorns." Mr. Johnson hesitated. For just a second. Then he nodded, forcing a laugh. "You know kids. She'll survive one night without it." He moved to shut the door. Panic flared in Emily's chest. She had to think fast. "Wait," she said quickly, stepping closer. "Actually, we need you to sign something before you go. Just a quick form we're updating for all the parents. Won't take more than a minute." Mr. Johnson's jaw tightened. He glanced at his car, then back at her. A moment passed. Then finally, he sighed. "All right. Let me just—" Before he could finish, Olivia suddenly blurted out, "Miss Emily, Mr. Johnson slammed the door shut. Emily barely kept her face neutral, but her mind was racing. Something was wrong. And now, she was sure of it. Across town, Marcus stepped off the bus, shoving the note deep into his pocket. The streetlights buzzed overhead, casting a yellow glow over the sidewalk as he made his way home. His neighborhood wasn't fancy, but it was his. The corner store, the basketball courts where he and his friends played, the diner where his mom worked long shifts, it was all familiar. But something about tonight felt different. His thoughts kept drifting back to the woman on the bus. She had looked exhausted, like life had thrown too much at her. And that note, what could possibly be so important? Marcus had never been the type to get involved in strangers' business. He had enough to deal with. College applications, his part-time job, keeping his grades up, so he could make something of himself. He didn't have time for mystery notes from people he didn't know. And yet, he reached into his pocket and felt the crumpled paper between his fingers. He told himself he wasn't going to think about it anymore. He was just going to go home, eat dinner, and forget it ever happened. But deep down, he knew he wouldn't. Back at the daycare, Emily stood frozen as Mr. Johnson climbed into the driver's seat and started the car. Her mind screamed at her to do something. To say something. But what? She had no proof, just a bad feeling. The engine roared to life. The car started rolling forward. Emily's heart pounded. And then, she did the only thing she could think of. She pulled out her phone and snapped a picture of the license plate. Just in case. As the taillights disappeared down the road, she exhaled, her breath shaky. Something wasn't right, and she wasn't about to let it go. Marcus, meanwhile, sat at his kitchen table, staring at the note in his hands. His mom bustled around behind him, exhausted from her shift, but still managing to hum softly under her breath as she put dinner together. He knew he should just throw the paper away. Forget about it. But instead, he unfolded it one more time. Meet me at the coffee shop on 8th Street. Tomorrow, 5 p.m. It's important. He didn't know why, but he knew he was going. And whatever was waiting for him there, it was going to change everything. The next morning, Emily barely slept. Her mind replayed the events of the previous evening over and over. Olivia's whisper, the father's odd behavior, the way he rushed her away. It wasn't just her imagination. Something was off. But what could she do with this feeling? She wasn't a detective. She wasn't a parent. She was just a daycare worker trying to make a difference in the lives of children. But now she felt like she had stumbled into something dark, something she wasn't prepared for. At the daycare that morning, Emily's unease only grew. She kept a close eye on Olivia, who had arrived with her father, this time without hesitation. The girl seemed quieter than usual, her big brown eyes scanning the room like she was trying to read the faces around her. She smiled when she saw Emily, but it wasn't the same wide, carefree smile from before. It was more guarded. "Hi, Miss Emily," Olivia said, her voice soft. "I like your shoes." Emily smiled back, though the words felt hollow in her mouth. "Thanks, Olivia. How are you today?" "Good," the little girl replied, but her eyes darted toward her father, who was talking to another parent near the door. His back was turned, but Emily could feel the tension in the air. She knelt down to Olivia's level. "Are you sure everything's okay at home?" she asked gently, her voice quiet enough that only the girl could hear. Olivia's eyes widened for a second, and then she looked around the room nervously. "Daddy says we have to go soon. But I want to stay here. I want to play." Emily's heart dropped. There was again the hesitation, the worry that wasn't normal for a child who loved coming to daycare. She had to do something, but what? If she said anything to the authorities without solid proof, she could end up making everything worse for Olivia. Across town, Marcus was still haunted by the note he had received on the bus. He couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just some random act of kindness. Something bigger was at play. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but there was something in the way the woman had handed him that note. The urgency in her eyes. The way she had seemed to disappear almost as if she had never been there at all. Marcus didn't tell anyone about the note. His friends wouldn't understand. His mom would just tell him to focus on school and not get mixed up in things he didn't understand. But he couldn't shake the pull of curiosity. He had to go. He had to find out what it was about. That afternoon, he made his way to the coffee shop on 8th Street, just like the note said. It wasn't far from his apartment, but it felt like an eternity as he walked the familiar streets. The closer he got, the more nervous he became. He couldn't explain why, but something deep inside him told him this was a pivotal moment in his life. The kind of moment that changes everything. When he reached the shop, he noticed it was quieter than usual. The usual crowd of people chatting over lattes and pastries was absent. He stepped inside and looked around, feeling suddenly out of place. A few people sat at tables, their faces buried in their phones or books, but no one paid him any attention. There was no sign of the woman from the bus. Marcus felt his palms start to sweat. Was he being set up? Maybe it was all just some elaborate prank. But there was something inside him that told him to wait. That maybe the woman would come. Maybe the note wasn't a mistake after all. As he sat down at a table near the window, his eyes scanned the room. The coffee shop was small but cozy, with mismatched chairs and soft lighting. It had a homey feel, the kind of place people would come to when they wanted to be alone but didn't want to be lonely. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each passing second stretching out into what felt like hours. Suddenly, the door opened, and a figure stepped inside. His breath caught in his throat. It was her, the woman from the bus. She glanced around quickly, her eyes sweeping the room before locking onto his. Without a word, she made her way toward him, her face pale, the same exhaustion he had seen on the bus etched into her features. She wore a large coat that swallowed her frame, and her eyes darted nervously around the room like she was afraid of being seen. "You came," she said, her voice barely above a whisper as she slid into the seat across from him. "Good. I was afraid you wouldn't." Marcus didn't know what to say. There were so many questions burning in his mind, but he didn't want to rush it. He needed answers, but he also didn't want to push her away. "Why did you give me the note?" he asked, his voice low. She hesitated, then leaned in closer, her voice shaking. "I need your help. I didn't know who else to turn to. You have to trust me." Marcus stared at her, trying to gauge if she was being honest or if she was just another stranger trying to pull him into something dangerous. The tension in the air thickened. It felt like the room had closed in around them. I don't even know you, Marcus said slowly. Why should I trust you? The woman looked down at the table, her fingers nervously tapping the edge. I can't explain everything right now, but you're the only one who can help me. You have to meet someone. They need to see you. Marcus frowned. Who? Who needs to see me? She glanced around the coffee shop again, as if to make sure no one was listening. I'll tell you everything, but not here. Not yet. You have to come with me. It's important. Marcus's mind raced. This was insane. He could just walk away. He could go home, forget everything, and stay out of whatever trouble this woman was clearly involved in. But something inside him, something he couldn't explain, told him this was bigger than anything he had ever experienced. Meanwhile, back at the daycare, Emily's day had only grown more unsettling. Olivia's behavior had become even more distant, and she wasn't playing with the other children like she usually did. She kept glancing toward the door, as if she were waiting for something or someone. As the day drew to a close, Emily found herself unable to shake the feeling that she needed to do something. She had already taken a picture of the license plate, but she needed more. She needed to know what was happening, and she couldn't wait any longer. She picked up the phone and called a friend who worked in child welfare, hoping she could offer some insight. As the phone rang, Emily's thoughts raced. She couldn't just stand by while Olivia might be in danger. She had to act, even if it meant stepping into unknown, dangerous territory. The phone picked up. Emily barely had a chance to speak before the friend's voice came on the line. Emily, what's going on? The voice asked, tension lacing the words. You sound frantic. I think something's wrong with one of my kids. Olivia, her dad, he's acting strange, and I don't know what to do. She heard her friend sigh on the other end of the line. Stay calm, Emily. Let's figure this out. But as Emily stared out the window, she knew she couldn't stay calm for much longer. Too many pieces were falling into place, and she wasn't sure she was ready for what came next. Emily gripped the phone tightly as her friend on the other end spoke in a calm but serious tone. Emily, listen. If you really think Olivia is in danger, you need to document everything. Any bruises? Any strange behavior before this? Emily swallowed hard. No bruises, but it's her demeanor. She's scared. And last night, when her dad picked her up, she whispered for help. Silence. Then her friend's voice dropped. That's enough for concern. You need to report this. I can put you in touch with someone. Emily turned to look at Olivia, who sat in the corner playing quietly with a stuffed bunny. Her small hands gripped it too tightly, her little body hunched forward. Something about the way she sat, as if she were trying to make herself smaller, made Emily's heart ache. I don't want to scare her, Emily whispered. You won't. But you need to act fast. Emily hesitated. She had been a daycare worker for years, had dealt with fussy kids, exhausted parents, and the usual struggles that came with the job. But this felt like stepping into something much bigger than she was prepared for. Still, she knew one thing. She couldn't ignore Olivia's plea. Across town, Marcus felt the weight of his decision pressing down on him. The woman across from him kept glancing at the door, her hands gripping her coffee cup like it was the only thing keeping her steady. He leaned forward. Tell me what's going on. She took a slow breath and then whispered. There's someone you need to meet. He knows things. Things about you. Marcus froze. Me? She nodded. It's not a coincidence that I picked you on that bus. I was looking for you. His pulse pounded in his ears. Why? She hesitated, her eyes darting to the window. Because you don't know who you really are. His stomach turned. He had lived his whole life in this neighborhood. Worked hard to get decent grades. Took care of his mom. There was nothing special about him. You're wrong, Marcus said. I'm just some kid trying to get through school. Her expression softened. You think that. But there are things happening around you that you don't see. And you're more connected to them than you realize. Marcus felt his breath catch. Something about her words sent a chill through him. It was ridiculous. It had to be. Then she leaned in closer and whispered, You've been watched, Marcus. For a long time. His body went stiff. By who? She glanced over her shoulder, then back at him. Come with me, and I'll show you. Every instinct told Marcus to walk away. He didn't know this woman. He didn't know what she wanted. But deep down, something in him whispered that this was the moment everything in his life was about to change. Back at the daycare, Emily paced near the window, her phone still clutched in her hand. She had given her friend Olivia's last name, her father's full name, everything she knew. The response had been immediate. "We'll look into it." That was it. No promises, no immediate action. Just "we'll look into it." Emily knew she couldn't just wait. She had to do something now. She turned back toward Olivia. The little girl looked up at her with wide, searching eyes. "Miss Emily?" she asked softly. Emily knelt down. "Yes, sweetheart." Olivia hesitated, then whispered, "Are you mad at me?" The words hit Emily like a punch to the gut. "Mad at you? Never. Why would you think that?" Olivia swallowed. "Because I asked for help." Emily's throat tightened. She reached out, gently placing a hand on Olivia's small shoulder. "You did the right thing," she whispered. "I promise." The door suddenly opened, and a rush of cold air filled the daycare. Emily turned, and her heart nearly stopped. Olivia's father stood there, his expression unreadable, his eyes scanning the room. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't in a rush like last time. He was just watching. A slow chill crawled down Emily's spine. Something was very, very wrong. At the same time, Marcus stepped out of the coffee shop, following the woman down a narrow alley. He knew this area, had walked these streets 100 times, but suddenly, everything felt unfamiliar. Like the city itself had changed around him. The woman moved quickly, her coat pulled tight around her. She glanced behind them every few steps. "Where are we going?" Marcus asked, his voice low. She didn't answer at first. Then she whispered, "Somewhere safe." They turned a corner, and suddenly, Marcus saw a black SUV parked at the curb. His heart slammed against his ribs. "Who's that?" The woman grabbed his wrist, her fingers tight. "Stay calm." The SUV door opened, and a man in a dark suit stepped out. His face was serious, unreadable. But his eyes locked onto Marcus like he had been expecting him. "Marcus," the man said, his voice even. "Get in the car." Marcus took a step back. "Who are you?" The woman squeezed his wrist. "He's the one I told you about. He has answers." Marcus's mind spun. Everything in him screamed to run. But something about the way the man looked at him, the way he knew his name, told Marcus that walking away wasn't an option. Not anymore. Back at the daycare, Olivia's father stepped forward, his eyes locking onto Emily's. "Miss Emily," he said, his voice calm, almost too calm. "We need to talk." Emily's heart pounded. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, Olivia sat frozen, gripping her stuffed bunny. And Emily knew. This was the moment everything would change. Emily forced herself to stand her ground as Olivia's father took another slow step forward. His expression remained calm, but there was something unsettling in his eyes, like he already knew she had done something. Like he could see right through her. "We need to talk," he repeated, his voice measured. Emily swallowed hard, glancing briefly at Olivia, who sat frozen, clutching her bunny. The little girl wasn't just quiet. She was holding her breath. Emily forced a polite smile, even though her heart was hammering. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Olivia's father didn't answer right away. Instead, he took another slow look around the daycare, as if making sure no one else was listening. Then his gaze settled back on Emily. "I noticed you watching us last night," he said. Her stomach clenched. He knew. Emily started, but he lifted a hand slightly, cutting her off. "I get it," he continued, his voice still eerily smooth. "You care about the kids here. That's a good thing." He let the words hang in the air before adding, "But sometimes, people see things they don't fully understand." Emily forced herself to keep breathing. He was warning her. She straightened her shoulders. "And sometimes, kids say things when they need help." For the first time, something flickered in his expression. Something sharp. He let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. "Kids have wild imaginations. Olivia's always been sensitive." Emily's fingers curled at her sides. Sensitive wasn't the word she would use. Terrified was more like it. "I appreciate your concern," he said, his voice dropping lower, "but I think it's best if Olivia and I find another daycare. Somewhere less involved." Emily's breath caught. He was pulling Olivia out.
No.
Her mind raced. If Olivia left now, she might never see her again. She might never get another chance to help her. She forced a smile. "That's your choice, of course," she said carefully. "But Olivia's happy here. She loves her friends. Maybe we could talk about this another time?" His eyes darkened slightly, and for a split second, Emily thought he might argue. But then, he exhaled through his nose and gave her a tight smile. "We'll see." He turned to Olivia and held out his hand. "Come on, sweetheart." Olivia hesitated, just for a moment. Then, slowly, she got up and took her father's hand. Emily's stomach twisted. She wanted to scream, to stop him, to do something. But as Olivia walked toward the door, she suddenly turned her head, just slightly, and whispered one word. "Tonight." Then she was gone. Emily's heart pounded in her chest. Tonight. What was happening tonight? Meanwhile, across the city, Marcus stood frozen on the sidewalk, staring at the man in the dark suit. The woman beside him still had her grip on his wrist, but her hand was trembling now, like she was just as afraid as he was. "Get in the car," the man said again. Marcus shook his head. "Not until you tell me who you are." The man sighed, then reached into his pocket. Marcus tensed, ready to bolt, but all the man pulled out was a folded piece of paper. He held it out. Marcus hesitated, then slowly reached for it. As soon as he unfolded it, his breath caught. It was a photograph. Of him. As a baby. Marcus's mind reeled. It was impossible. He had never seen this photo before, but there was no doubt it was him. He recognized his mother in the background, younger, smiling, holding him in her arms. But standing next to her was a man he had never seen before. His heart pounded. "Who is this?" The suited man studied him. "You don't recognize him?" Marcus shook his head. The man exhaled. "He's your father." Marcus felt like the world had tilted beneath him. "No," he said automatically. "My father left before I was born." "That's what you were told," the man said. "But it's not the truth." Marcus stared at the picture, his hands trembling. "Why are you showing me this?" The man's expression turned serious. "Because he's alive. And he's been looking for you." Marcus's breath caught. His father was alive? For years, his mother had refused to talk about him, only saying he was gone. But now, a complete stranger was telling him otherwise? The woman beside him squeezed his wrist. "Marcus, listen to me. If you come with us, you'll get the answers you've been searching for." Marcus's head spun. He had two choices. Walk away, pretend this never happened, or get in that car and uncover a past he never even knew existed. And for some reason, deep in his gut, he knew this wasn't just about him. It was bigger than that. Back at the daycare, Emily was running out of time. She sat at her desk, trying to steady her hands as she typed into her phone. Olivia said tonight. "I don't know what's happening, but I have to find out." Her friend texted back immediately. "Emily, be careful. Don't do anything reckless." Emily stared at the screen, then back at the door where Olivia had disappeared. She didn't have a choice. Because whatever was happening tonight, it could change everything. Emily gripped her phone tightly, her pulse racing as she sat in her car outside Olivia's house. She knew she shouldn't be here, that this was reckless, but Olivia's whispered warning, tonight, had left her with no other choice. If something was happening, she needed to know. The street was quiet, too quiet. Most houses had their lights off, and a faint wind rustled the trees. Emily's hands were clammy against the steering wheel as she watched the house. A single light was on in what she guessed was Olivia's bedroom. Then movement. The front door opened, and Olivia's father stepped out. Emily ducked lower in her seat, her heart thudding in her chest. He was alone, locking the door behind him. A black car sat idling at the curb, and without hesitation, he got inside. The car pulled away slowly, disappearing into the night. Emily's stomach twisted. He had left Olivia behind. That was her chance. She forced herself to take a deep breath before stepping out of the car, her legs shaky. Every step toward the house felt heavier than the last. What if she was wrong? What if she was overreacting? But then she remembered the way Olivia had clung to her, the fear in her eyes. She couldn't walk away. Emily reached the front door and hesitated. It was locked, of course. But as she stepped back, her eyes caught movement near the side of the house. A window. It was slightly open. Her heart pounded as she moved toward it. It was a tight squeeze, but she pushed it up just enough to slip inside, landing softly on the carpeted floor. The house was dark, silent, the air thick with something unexplainable. Then a soft sound. A whimper. Emily turned toward the noise, her breath catching. Olivia stood at the top of the stairs, gripping the railing, her bunny clutched tightly in her arms. "Miss Emily," her voice was barely a whisper. Emily's chest ached. "I'm here, sweetheart." Olivia's eyes were wide, darting to the hallway behind her. "We have to go. Now." Emily's stomach dropped. "What do you mean? Your dad just left." "No," Olivia whispered, shaking her head. "He's coming back. And he's not alone." Before Emily could react, headlights flashed through the window. A car was pulling up. Panic surged through her. She grabbed Olivia's hand and pulled her toward the back of the house, searching for another way out. But before they could reach the door, a loud click echoed through the house. The front door unlocked. Emily barely had time to react before voices filled the air. "Take her." The words sent a cold chill through her body. A shadow moved toward the stairs. Emily turned, scooping Olivia into her arms as she sprinted toward the kitchen. She could hear footsteps behind her, fast, closing in. Her hands shook as she reached for the back door handle, locked. Trapped. She spun, pressing Olivia close, her mind racing. There had to be another way. Then crash. The front door burst open fully, and heavy footsteps stormed inside. Emily's breath caught as Olivia let out a small whimper. But then, a voice, one she didn't expect. "Emily." Her head snapped up. It was the police. Officers swarmed the house, shouting orders. The men who had entered with Olivia's father barely had time to react before they were thrown to the ground, handcuffed within seconds. Emily's knees nearly buckled with relief. She turned to see Olivia's father, his face twisted in rage as two officers restrained him. "How?" he started, but then his eyes locked onto Emily. And suddenly she knew. He knew she had called them. A shiver ran through her, but she didn't care. Because Olivia was safe. One of the officers rushed toward them. "Are you okay?" Emily nodded quickly, still holding Olivia close. "She's safe. That's all that matters." The officer exhaled, then turned toward the men now in custody. "We've been after these guys for a while. We got a tip tonight that something was going down here." Emily's mind spun. A tip? She hadn't had time to call anyone. So who had? Before she could ask, Olivia tugged on her sleeve, looking up at her with big, teary eyes. "You came," she whispered. Emily's heart swelled. She knelt down, brushing Olivia's hair gently. "Of course I did. I always will." The nightmare was over. Or so she thought. Meanwhile, across town, Marcus sat in the back of the black SUV, staring at the man who claimed to know his father. His hands were still shaking from the shock of the photo, his mind racing. He had no idea where they were going, or what he was about to uncover. But deep down, he knew this was just the beginning. Emily sat on the edge of the ambulance step, watching as the police cars pulled away, their lights flashing in the night. Olivia was wrapped in a blanket, sitting beside her with a cup of hot cocoa that one of the officers had given her. She had stopped shaking, but her small fingers were still curled tightly around Emily's hand, as if afraid to let go. Emily squeezed her hand gently. "You're safe now," she whispered. Olivia looked up at her, eyes filled with something Emily couldn't quite place: relief, exhaustion, but also something deeper. Trust. One of the officers approached, flipping through his notepad. "We're taking him in," he said, nodding toward the police car where Olivia's father sat, his head bowed, his hands cuffed. We still need to sort through everything, but from what we've gathered, he wasn't just running from the law. He was part of something much bigger. Emily's stomach twisted. She had always felt something was off about him, but she had never imagined this. "What happens to Olivia now?" she asked, voice softer. The officer sighed. "Child Services will step in. They'll find a safe place for her." A lump formed in Emily's throat. The idea of Olivia being sent away, placed with strangers, after everything she had been through. It didn't sit right. She glanced down at Olivia, who was looking up at her, as if sensing her thoughts. Emily took a deep breath and turned back to the officer. "Is there any way she can stay with me?" The officer hesitated. "You have to go through the proper channels. Foster care, legal procedures. It's not simple." "I don't care," Emily said quickly. "I just want to make sure she's okay." The officer studied her for a long moment before nodding. "I'll talk to someone. It'll take time, but if you're serious, that might be possible." Hope flickered in Emily's chest. She looked at Olivia again and smiled softly. "Would you like that?" Olivia didn't speak. She just nodded and leaned her head against Emily's arm. Across town, Marcus sat in the dimly lit cafe, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee he had barely touched. The man who had picked him up, the one who had claimed to know his father, sat across from him, watching him carefully. Marcus's mind was still spinning from everything he had learned in the past hour. His father was alive. He had been searching for him, and the reason he had disappeared all those years ago wasn't what his mother had told him. "He didn't leave you," the man said again, his voice calm but firm. "He was taken." Marcus clenched his jaw. "That doesn't make sense. If he was taken, why didn't he try to find me sooner?" The man sighed, rubbing his temples. "Because he couldn't. The people who took him, they were dangerous. And if they knew about you, they would have used you to control him." Marcus's stomach turned. "So why now? Why am I only hearing about this today?" The man leaned forward. "Because something changed. He finally got free. And the first thing he did was look for you." Marcus exhaled slowly, his mind racing. His whole life, he had believed one version of the story, that his father had walked away, that he hadn't wanted to be a part of his life. But now, everything was flipped upside down. He looked down at the old photograph in his hand, the one of his father holding him as a baby. For the first time, he wondered, had he been wrong all along? And if so, what did that mean for everything else? Emily sat by Olivia's hospital bed later that night, watching the little girl sleep. The doctors had insisted on a checkup, just to make sure she was okay. Physically, she was fine. But Emily knew the real wounds were deeper. As she brushed a strand of hair from Olivia's forehead, a soft voice broke the silence. "You saved me." Emily looked down to see Olivia's eyes open, sleepy but sincere. Tears stung Emily's eyes. "You saved yourself, sweetheart. You were so brave." Olivia shook her head. "You listened." Emily swallowed hard, her heart aching at the weight of those two simple words. She had listened. And because of that, Olivia was safe. Outside the hospital room, the officer from earlier stood waiting. As Emily stepped out, he gave her a small nod. "I put in a request with Child Services. It's not a guarantee, but you have a strong case." Emily's chest tightened. "Thank you." He studied her for a moment. "Not many people would have done what you did." Emily shook her head. Not many people were listening. The officer nodded, as if understanding. Then he handed her a card. "If you need anything, call me." She took it, gripping it tightly. "I will." Marcus stood outside the airport, his mind still racing. He had a choice to make. The man had given him a plane ticket, a way to meet his father, a way to finally get the answers he had spent his whole life searching for. But taking that step meant walking into a past he wasn't sure he was ready to face. He looked at the ticket in his hand. Then, slowly, he exhaled and started walking. Back at the hospital, Emily sat beside Olivia, holding her tiny hand in hers. She didn't know what the future would hold, but one thing was certain. She wasn't going to stop fighting for this little girl, no matter what it took.